So good morning, welcome back. I hope you have recovered well from the massive dose of information that you got yesterday at the workshops. I have one comment from a person in one of you participants who said, "Oh, I never knew that public procurement could be so fascinating." So I thought maybe that's a very good sign of, even if you're in your different fields and you're all very knowledgeable, it could be that, you know, going over to another workshop or another field has been useful for some of you. So I hope all of you had that kind of epiphany about public procurement or something else yesterday. I am, unfortunately, again, I'm going to be the school teacher here and tell you about the household rules. So again, if you want to have your fruit and your coffee and all that, remember to carry your badges with you. And also, when you leave today after this session, you need to hand in your badges. And there's a carton box by the door. If you turn around, it says with big capital letters, badges. That's where you drop it off at the end of the day, at lunch, before you go to the airport or wherever you're going. So don't forget to hand in your badges. Second of all, a little reminder about the photography here. You are, of course, extremely welcome and encouraged to use Twitter with the hashtag Building Social Europe. So please post your pictures, go on your Instagram or your Facebook or wherever you're active. The Wi-Fi codes are written here on the wall. I think it's behind here again. Password is the same as the net name, so it's very simple. But for those of you who have demanded not to be on photos, the people that you're not supposed to post photos of will be wearing a red badge. Your badge is blue predominantly, but some might have red badges. So if you're taking photographs and you see somebody with a red badge, then refrain from posting that photo. And I think that was the end of the house rules. So today we have another packed day. It's only a half day, but it's going to be full of speakers, so you're going to have your ears with you again. First of all, today we are going to watch a little film produced by a social platform, the organizers, which is basically an appeal, an introduction of, how to implement the pillar of social rights, how the social platform would like decision makers to see the subject and use in their decision making. So without much further ado, Juris, if you will put the film on for us. Thank you.
Including food, quality and inclusive education, equal treatment and opportunities, fair working conditions, work-life balance, social protection and care for all, quality and affordable services. The social pillar will only be a success if there is a strong political will and a clear vision for Europe that is fully aligned with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This implies that all new actions take into account the social, economic, and environmental consequences they generate. As political leaders, will you, in the next 5 years, bring the necessary changes to the EU economic model, prioritize the implementation of the social pillar, make civil dialogue a foundation of the European democracy? Behind social platform are millions of citizens engaged in local, regional, national, and European associations, cooperatives, and social enterprises. We work together to achieve positive social progress. Are you ready to engage with us?
This is, of course, are you ready to engage with us? Is, of course, a question I suppose we're going to deal with the first panel. We're going to look at, how will decision making work with civil societies? What are the obstacles and opportunities in this new process? Now, I'm not going to be your cicerone for this one, but I'm going to introduce to you the moderator for this first panel, which is Catherine Norton, and she is the Vice President of Social Platform. And without much further ado, welcome. The floor is yours.
Is this working, the microphone? So yeah, I would really welcome all of our speakers to the panel. You can, yes. Where is your name actually? Here. Well, then you can sit there. Here is good. So we have 2 microphones there that we will... So as you've seen on the program, we have a first 1-hour session where we will... I'm too close to the microphone. Too far from the microphone. Okay. Is this correct? So I was just introduced there as Catherine Nocton. I'm from the Management Committee of Social Platform, and I'm very happy to introduce this panel this morning, which includes upcoming presidencies. Also, we have a speaker from the president of Eurochild. You have all of the biographies there in front of you, so I'll introduce each person, but I'm not going to read their biographies because then we would lose our hour, because all of our speakers have such extensive experience in the field of social policy. So we have Marie-Louise Calero-Preca, who's the former president of Malta and the president of Eurochild, who I will address some questions to first. We're also then honoured to have representatives of the current and next presidencies of the EU. So we have Saila Roth, the State Secretary to the Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. We have Maria Pletikosa, the State Secretary to the Croatian Ministry for Demography, Family, Youth and Social Policy. We have Dr. Stender, the Permanent State Secretary to the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, Director General. And then we have Katerina Ivanovic-Knezovic, who's the Director for Social Affairs of the European Commission's Directorate for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So I was going to start by asking you particular questions, Marie-Louise. So firstly, given that you have spent your career defending social justice, we see now an emphasis in the Finnish presidency on economy for well-being, using the economy as a lever to promote social justice and social advancement. What are your views on this approach and what do you expect from it? Is it working for you?
It's really good at pushing buttons, really. Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you. And, well, I think this is commendable. And I must commend the Finnish presidency for choosing, really, this concept of economy for well-being. Also, by coining competition and social inclusion. And this is because I'm a believer that you can never look at the economy on its own and think that first you have to address economic growth and then look at the social dimension of things. I believe that you have to take both together forward, because the more that you ignore the social and the social dimension, the more that then you need to invest if we want to speak in the context of the economy. The more you need to spend to address the multipliers of social inequalities. Therefore, I think it is very, very wise for the Finnish presidency to put forward this approach, bringing the economy and well-being, but well-being is a multidimensional concept which definitely embraces all the whole spectrum of social policy, together with the environmental and and quite a number of other issues. I think this is very wise, and I think this can set the tone also for the new Commission. I must mention this because I have, from the very first, President von der Leyen is giving visibility to the social aspect. I come from Eurochild, I'm the president of Eurochild, so children to us are very important. And again, I must mention the team of the Finnish presidency, which I really must commend, this sustainable Europe, sustainable future. And to me, future would mean our future leaders, that is today's children are present. Therefore, again, there is this coining of sustainability for a sustainable Europe and a sustainable future, because this must be the way forward. And President von der Leyen, from her very first speech, laying out the basic, one could say, agenda of her presidency, and also through her letters of mandate to the different commissioners, she is putting much visibility to the future leaders of Europe, of our European project, because she has, even though we wished as Eurochild to have a new commissioner for children, however, I'm a very positive person, and we are very positive at Eurochild. We are saying we got a vice president now with very explicit responsibilities for children, to address child poverty in particular through a child guarantee, which President von der Leyen has already committed to, but also a number of commissioners, like the Commissioner for Jobs, who has been given the mandate to actually take on board the child guarantee. Then there is the Commissioner for Equality, who again, through the letter of mandate by President von der Leyen, is being given the responsibility to address poverty and social exclusion, and including age, that is, I would translate it into, again, children in focus. The child guarantee itself, there are 5 basic fundamentals on which the child guarantee has to be built. That is the access to health, access to education, childcare, nutrition, and housing. So again, all these commissioners that within their mandate, these pillars would fall, they would have to be concentrating on children as well to put forward. So I have hope. I have hope that the social pillar will come into effect. Obviously, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we will have to wait. However, I have hope. Also, I have hope through these commitments that the new president of the Commission has made, but also the Finnish presidency is putting forward and giving visibility to the members of our society, of our societies, to the people of Europe. These are the calls that we have been having from our streets and our squares. This is the actual aspiration of the people of Europe, to be able to enjoy quality of life, to be able to enjoy a standard, a proper standard of living, to be able to live in an inclusive society, to be able to live with an equal and equitable approach to life. So I think the Finnish presidency has taken on board what the call of the people of Europe are actually putting forward to politicians, to all stakeholders, including civil society. So really, I must commend the Finnish presidency, and really, I have hope in President von der Leyen to push forward and continue to give not just visibility, but implement the commitments that she has laid forward through her very first speech outlining her agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I see you give a very positive endorsement to the idea and the emphasis on the economy for well-being. I wanted to ask you just one follow-up question. Thank you also for giving us an overview of how you see the new Commission and its commitment in this field. Where do you see, given your role coming from leadership of government towards then civil society, where do you see the role of civil society in this economy for well-being or in advancing social policy?
If the Commission is truly taking on board this, it cannot ignore civil society. It has to embrace civil society as partners, as an intrinsic partner in the implementation and putting forward all what is necessary. Civil society bring in real time the aspirations of the people. Civil society is a very important pillar of our democracies. And what is democracy all about? It's creating a sense, creating a context for well-being, because well-being embraces also social justice. Therefore, civil society is a very, very important stakeholder. Besides, also, we need to work together. It is not possible for only for politicians. We need the political will first and foremost, but I am presuming that there is the political will from the statements that we have been hearing from the new president. But besides the politicians and the governments and authorities, we need to have civil society intrinsically involved and consulted all the time and heard, and also engaged to help in the implementation. Because civil society has a way of doing things in a more slimmer way than governments. Civil society are efficient operators and can relay also what is happening in on our streets, squares, and wherever our people are. Therefore, I see civil society as a very important component of this platform to implement what is being stated.
Thank you very much. So now you can pass the mic. We're really looking forward to hearing a little bit more from you on the Finnish approach to the economy for well-being, what your plans are, if there's any updates you would like to present in terms of how things have advanced during the presidency. And I would also like to probably, you've had thanks already for hosting us here during this presidency, but we really appreciate that we're able to have this discussion together with everyone here during your presidency. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here. And thank you for organizing this whole conference and event. Well, I think you have probably all been already in some seminars and heard about the basic stuff about this whole approach of economy of well-being, so I don't need to go through that whole thing again, and we already had a little bit of a speech here about the whole thing. And well, if concretely we are like, well, the whole feedback from other member states has been very positive, I think. People have been thanking Finland for bringing this approach to the agenda, saying that this is a little bit more like a fresher way of talking about not only the traditional way of talking about welfare states or welfare societies, but like a new mindset and a new way of thinking that really welfare is not just like a one slice of society or one slice of the work of the governments, but you have to take all the sectors, like really think it through cross-sectorally, that every part of the actions of the state and the actions of EU are accounted with this whole approach, that you can't, well, as said here before, that you can't think in that way that first you need to get the economy going and then after that you might get some well-being, but you need to get, like at the same time that they are interlinked, that you need the well-being of people in order to get any solutions or good results on the economy side as well. So I think this has been thanked, and now we are doing the conclusions that are going to be handled on October and December, I think, and it's going great. I just heard some latest feedback on that work from our people doing that job, and I'm really looking forward to it. I have a positive feeling that this will be something that is hopefully kept alive, and this is also something that we need to do together. Like it's not only that like Finland as one presidency or one country or member state can do alone, but hopefully other states and of course the social partners and the whole civil society will be, you know, with us in this job, and we can keep the topic on the agenda together after this our term.
Thank you. And if you were to highlight for you what would be the top achievements in social policy field, you've already mentioned this, how you've influenced the thinking and that's been welcomed by member states. Are there things that, because it's not an easy moment with the new commission to actually have concrete deliverables during your presidency in social policy, are there any things that you'd particularly feel proud of having achieved?
Maybe I'm thinking a little bit too concretely now, because you know, you all know that like social policy is not in the EU plat or plate in such. So the biggest thing that we can do, I think, is the mindset, is the way of thinking, is the culture that we can sort of like try to culturally or just by discussing, try to convince people that really you as member states, please do, you know, share this idea with us and do your part as well. So that, you know, you all know that EU can't force any member state to, that now you need to have this kind of a social system or social policy system. So in that sense, can't give you any concrete ideas, but that's not the point. The point is to have this shared way of thinking, and that's something that I think we are going forward.
Thank you very much. And could we hear now about the plans of the Croatian presidency in relation to social policy and advancing on social Europe during your
thank you, Your Excellence, your dear trio partners, dear ministers and ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak about the priorities of the Croatian presidency. This conference covers a large number of topics from the wide area of social policy and democratic decision-making in the EU. Also, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for the organization of workshops that have a holistic approach to solving of number of issues, especially in terms of homeless persons, health and social fairness. The Croatian priorities of the EU Council presidency in the field of social policy also have a holistic approach to the topics relevant to the EU today and in the future. The priorities of a Croatian presidency relate to demographic challenges and the future of social policy, promotion of gender equality, empowerment of women and equality in the labor market. These priorities will be the focus of the EPSCO Council meetings and the respective committees and working groups. Thank you. We all know that the whole EU is facing issues regarding demographic developments. It is therefore necessary to create a synergy of proactive social, demographic and employment policies. As part of the Croatian presidency, various events that deal with this issue are planned to be organized. One of them is the Conference of Demographic Challenges and Opportunities for EU Development and Progress. The goal of the conference is to discuss existing and future policies at EU level that address the negative demographic trends. However, we will also address other issues, for example, the youth field, by the organization of a conference on opportunities for young people in rural areas. The other complex areas in our focus are social exclusion and poverty. The Croatian presidency will encourage learning and exchange of best practices in relation to public policies aimed at preventing poverty and social exclusion of the most vulnerable groups. Therefore, we will organize a conference on the topic, an integrated approach to the protection of children at risk, with the focus on the issues of unaccompanied children, children of Roma national minority, children with problems in behavior, and children in migration. This conference will be the basic for Council conclusions in these areas. In terms of the second priority, the Croatian presidency will focus in increasing women's participation in the labor market. The focus is placed on removing barriers to increase the presence of women in the labor market. For this aim, a high-level conference will be organized, which will serve for making the Council conclusions on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that detailed description. You can see also a lot of the themes the Finnish presidency have been working on continued through the Croatian presidency next year. And we look forward to seeing how all of those events feed into the European policy making. Thank you. And now, looking even further into the future, towards the second half of next year, we're very interested to hear how you see the social policy priorities during the German presidency.
Many thanks. It's our turn in the second half of next year. And first of all, I have to apologize that my minister, Hubertus Heil, and our permanent state secretary, Rolf Schmachtenberg, didn't make it to Helsinki today. This is as often due to domestic politics reasons. At the moment, we are fighting a great injustice in Germany when it comes to pensions. Many people in Germany who have worked all their lives end up with a basic income transfer when they are old because their low wages were not enough to get an sustainable pension then when they retire, and we want to change that, and this is why we're going to introduce a basic pension in Germany. We do not want to accept any longer that low-paid workers have to go to apply for social welfare benefits when they're old, and this is an important issue for us that keeps us busy in Berlin at the moment. Many thanks to Social Platform for the invitation, and many thanks for this really excellent video you've been showing. It could serve as a teaser for our presidency somehow, because you are describing the goals and the guidelines that are leading all of us, may I say. The social pillar of the European Union 2 years ago, established in Gothenburg. This is a political document at the moment, and we have to fill that with policies now, and this is what all of us are trying to do. And in the global sphere, you've been mentioning in the video the SDGs and the United Nations Agenda for 2030, and this is exactly what leads us. And in the case of the German presidency, we haven't decided on that formally. As you mentioned, there's still some way to go. But we are picking out 3 major issues. The one is the framework for minimum wages in Europe. They can't be they can be regulated, they can be agreed by social partners. In any case, social partners will have a decisive role in that. But as you saw, the new Commission's president-elect decided to formulate a concept in the first 100 days in office. So we are counting days now in Berlin, and look what she's doing on that. And that, from my mind, to my mind, is the most important issue of our presidency, I think. And that meets the interests of social platform, because social platform urged for something like that, I think in 2014, the first time. And let's see what how Commission is taking its monopoly of initiative in that, and then as a presidency we are in a role to do our best to make that fly. Second thing is dealing with modern technology and with digitalization and what it does to the world of work. We are a bit concerned that if platform work leads to more and more self-employed, that this will be kind of a stress test for our social insurances and how to prepare for that. In some developments in social policy, one can wait how things go and then regulate after. But these changes are so groundbreaking in our economy that we won't have the time to wait and see. And so we are curious to hear how other member states cope with that. And due to the fact that platform work and the changes that go with artificial intelligence for our industries, that those things are quite international concepts. We will need the European Union for that, I'm quite sure. And then thirdly, you've been mentioning SDGs in the video. As such an important economy in the world, the European Union has to take its responsibility for due diligence and for fighting for human rights in the globalized economy. And I think that the idea of supply chain management and of sustainable supply chains and using free trade agreements to enforce due diligence in the world, that might be a good third issue for our presidencies. So far, many thanks.
I'm just taking this microphone because I've had some feedback that the other one is not producing a loud enough voice. So can I just ask you one small question of clarification? It was very good indeed to hear about those three priorities during the German presidency. On the first one regarding minimum wage, how do you see minimum wage and minimum income? How are they related for you, and how do you see it going into the presidency?
Well, we are not at the point to answer that technically, because the European Commission is in the position to table a concept, and as a presidency we have to be kind of neutral and then deal with what the Commission is proposing. But if you're asking me personally, then from my mind, there is a certain linkage between minimum income system and minimum wage, because no one is going to work for a wage that is under or close to the minimum income. So economically, there is a relation between that, and this makes it difficult for us as regulators, because minimum wages should be negotiated by social partners, whilst these bottom line is a political thing that is regulated by the state. So we have to talk to each other, and this is what social platform is about.
Thank you very much. And we will be focused on that during the discussions on that you're going to have during the presidency. Finally, I give you the opportunity to present what the planning is from the European Commission side, any reflections you have on what will be achieved during these next year and a half. And then afterwards, you will have an opportunity to ask questions from the floor. We do have a coffee break foreseen between 10 and 10:30. We'd have at least a 20-minute coffee break, but you would have a chance in case you can already prepare in case you have questions for any of our speakers. And then I would give you all an opportunity to give feedback either on the questions or other reflections you have.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Well, if you look at the video in the beginning and the last answer was, are you ready to join or are you ready to commit? I guess if I wouldn't be ready, then it would be a huge problem because European Commission indeed is driving the whole pillar idea and the principles and everything related to it. I'm so happy and optimistic when I see my previous speakers because really all of you are taking on board what has been put not only in pillar but European social model. And Maria Louise, thank you very much for the kind words, and indeed all of us in the Commission have a high aspiration when it comes to the new president-elect and her ideas about how the social Europe should look like. I know many of you had concern why my commissioner is called Jobs, and yesterday we had a small discussion among, I would say, friends, and then we say in the end, you know, Umberto Eco wrote an amazing book called The Name of the Rose, and the last sentence goes, the rose would still smell the same even if it wouldn't be called a rose. So for me, the most important is what is in the mission letters and what is it there, what is put as principles and as the ideas to be developed. So that is the key point. I agree that maybe some wording might come in a question, but nevertheless, what is there and what we are going to do is the most important. When it comes to the topics and to the division, I would say, of the files within the president's cabinet, vice presidents, and the commissioners, I think never in the history of European Commissions, more commissioners had in their portfolios topics related to social policy. This also shows the way that we want to do and the way that we want to deal with the social policy in Europe. Sometimes when we think about why 2020 targets are not yet or will not be achieved, maybe one of the reasons is that the biggest emphasis has been put on only social ministries, social agencies, those dealing with the social policy, while it goes so much broad. And then when we linked it with the economy of well-being, it's related to health, it's related to housing, it's related to education, it's related to all of the aspects of the life. And even more in the national administration, it is related to the ministries of finance and those who have money and who distribute the funds. So therefore, I think this next generation of the Commission is really going to put the social at the heart of our policies, not only in DG employment, not only in DG Just, not only in the vice presidents dealing with demography, but everybody will have to take it on board. Now to come back to the more concrete ideas that are on the table and that will derive from the economy of well-being. And I also appreciate a lot the council conclusions which are being drafted and are almost, I would say, in a quite very well-developed phase and really represent what the holistic approach the Finnish are proposing means and what is this new way of thinking and everybody doing its own share. We could translate it also and link it closely to the pillar. I still remember in 2017, at that time I was in a role of the national administration. There was so much skepticism about the pillar, saying it's only the political principles. It's nothing. There is nothing behind. Why should it be? A commission is not going to do anything under the pillar. What is the role of the member states, etc. Now I think 2 years after, a year and a half actually after the implementation implementation of pillar, or after the proclamation of the pillar, we already see some results. We already see in the area of social policy, we have the new work-life balance that is purely the result of the pillar. We have the new recommendation on the social protection, European Accessibility Act, transparent and predictable working conditions as a directive. It's also another contribution to pillar. And what the president-elect has said, it's very clear for me, for us in the Commission at least, an action plan to fully implement the pillar principles. So to fully implement means for us to implement each and every pillar principles. And what we hope and what our desires are, that indeed within the implementation, everybody has the role to play. We spoke yesterday in the workshop on housing that I joined about different roles, the roles of the EU or EC in general, of European Parliament as well, because the Parliament has important role to play, the role of national authorities at national, local, regional level and municipal level, the role of social partners and the role of civil society. I think if we are managed to put all of this in the action plan and define how are they going to contribute, then we would really succeed something. And I fully also believe that we should think about linking all of our activities also with the SDGs. The 10 years have proven to be quite a good period for implementation and for really being ready to prepare some major reforms. Yesterday at the conference on pension adequacy that we had here in Finland, we spoke about the challenges that our member states are facing. And if even the great Germany is facing challenges in a pension system, then what the rest of the member states would think. So this is, and I'm not just saying because you are sitting here, but it's the fact that it is important to put all those challenges in the perspective. And then we link it to the demographic challenges. And if we say that today 3 workers are on 1 pensioner, and if projections that are presently visible show that by 2060 there will be 1-1, which is really a dangerous figure, so to speak. So 1 worker per 1 pensioner, then our pension systems are going to face enormous problems. I don't know how we would be able to secure sustainability, and I even less know how we would be able to secure adequacy of the pensions for our pensioners. So all of our systems need to adapt, and this is not 2 years process or 5 years process, or this is really a long-term process. So we'll see how future European policy in the field of contributing to SDGs, how ambitious is it going to be? But I presume that it's going to be very ambitious, because I think without an ambitious targets, we cannot reach anything and we cannot be anywhere. Child guarantee has mentioned several times. Indeed, it is in 2 mission letters. So the Vice President Šuica, Dubravka Šuica, the Croatian one, and my commissioner, Mr. Nikola Schmidt, have clearly this defined task how to deal with the child guarantee. So it says, and the President-elect clearly said, each child in need should have access to services like health and education. Like means we can, of course, add additional services and see how to address it, but these are really very important, because all the inequalities and the inequality of opportunities is shown in this early age. And if we manage to address it at the early age, then we would secure that they have a brighter future that they could have without those opportunities that they should embrace and should use. So to wrap up briefly, we are very, I would say, anxious in a European Commission also to start working with a new Commission. We are absolutely ready, prepared, fully on board. I'm also looking forward for the new ways that Commission itself will work. And the President-elect clearly said that she wants all the services working together and be speaking with one voice. We have been speaking with one voice, but it was sometimes this division of tasks was so clearly so defined that it could really harm the whole process of having everybody on board and being really as one voice.
Thank you very much. So you've reflected actually what all of the speakers have done beforehand, the interconnectedness. So you've seen it's reflected in the structure of the new commission with social objectives placed across different portfolios. And it's part of not just the economy of well-being, but the idea that you won't achieve well-being for people in Europe. We still have growing inequality. We have, as you've mentioned, abject poverty, child poverty, the economic situation of migrants, other people far from the labour market, without action across all policy fields. So this is reflected in the SDGs, which showed that the Millennium Development Goals had achieved certain things, but many people had been left behind. And so it's clear that with this new commission and during these new presidencies, the emphasis on leaving no one behind and taking all the measures available at the disposal of the European Union member states are needed now to make sure that doesn't go further. I have one hand here I'm looking for, and I have Machi, 2, 3, 4. Can we take with 4 questions like that? So we have 2 speakers here and 2 here.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Ivo Kaplan. I am from European Anti-Poverty Network from the Czech Republic, Prague. So I have a question for this representative of Commission. How they have the plan to influence the decisions of national member states? Because I think on the EU level, we have very nice materials all the time, and social pillar is quite clear substance. But now there is the task for even President-elect Ursula von der Leyen, and for you or for your commissioners, how they will impact decisions of national member states, because it's a lack of information, it's a lack of decision-making, there is a lack of everything. And I should say that the Czech Republic is one of the best in results, but it's one of the worst in this information for normal people, because our journalists are so weak to inform anybody.
Thank you very much. Maciej Kucharczyk, Vice President of Social Platform and Policy Director of Age Platform Europe. I would like to congratulate Germany for addressing the issue of low-paid workers in a life cycle approach, so with a basic pension. I think it's not only about low-paid workers, it's about also how to ensure dignity for those who, at different stages of their lives, they couldn't work, they couldn't save for their pensions. But then looking forward to the German presidency, I would be very interested to know whether you would relaunch, whether you would lead the discussion on a minimum income. The work that has been done already at the European level as part of the active inclusion strategy, including also the question of an adequate minimum income along life cycle. So is this something where we could count on the German presidency? Because there is a discussion on minimum wage, but this is not the same thing. We do believe that at the European level, the discussion on a minimum income for all age groups should be taken on board. Thank you very much.
Do you have a microphone, Shan? So, who was it? And then, yeah, and there was a lady beside.
Yes, thanks very much. Yes, Sian Jones from European Anti-Poverty Network. Thanks very much for the inputs. I wanted just to focus really on the question of poverty, and I'm very pleased to hear that it's going to be a key priority for Croatia particularly. I think what we'd like to know, though, is where the talk is about the post-2020 strategy. We have a current strategy, a poverty target to reduce poverty by at least 20 million, and obviously we haven't done that. So we'd like to be hearing that there's a really key priority to continue with the target linked to the SDGs. And I think it's important we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have got a poverty target. We don't want to lose it. We want it to be more ambitious and linked to the SDGs. But where is the post-2020 strategy? And the second thing is just on picking up the adequate minimum income. We'd understood that the German presidency was looking at an idea of an EU framework on minimum income as well as minimum wage, because the two go together. And I think this message that it's a positive hierarchy. You start with adequate minimum income, which is principle 14, and then you have minimum wages above, not the idea of pushing down minimum incomes in order to make work pay. I think that is not a positive way to go in terms of the pillar of social rights.
Good morning. My name is Carmen. I represent the European Roma Grassroots Organization. I have a question for the State Secretary to the Finnish Minister, but first I would like to congratulate the upcoming presidency of Croatia that they think about taking up the Roma subject on their agenda. This is very important to us. I've been here for the last couple of days and I heard a lot about how the Finnish government and in the country you are seeing at these social rights and everything. But what I witnessed last night, it was a bit of shocking. I was going on the street with my Roma fellow dressed in her Roma dress attire, and we were not allowed to enter in 3 public spaces because she was wearing her Roma attire, which belongs to her ethnicity. I would like to know why in the Finnish society, yet the social right dimension and the human right dimension of minorities is not implemented if your country is taken as a good example. Thank you.
There is one last question, and then I'm going to give this floor to the speakers to answer.
Thanks, Philippe Steck, French. I want to tell that in France, social security, that 5 billion euros, but social protection, all social protection, that 7 billion euros. So the question is to give more coordination between all actors, and also with the Yellow Gillette movement to understand that it's local communities, local ONG, sometimes who are innovated. So for me, that's very essential to the children and also for the climate, the local communities and so on. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, one last hand at the back, and then really I'm going to give the floor back to the panelists, so you can be ready.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the speeches, and it was very interesting. And we all agree about this well-being new European society, of course. But if I look at the figures, Eurostat figures, in 2011, we have 83 million of people living under the line of poverty. In 2018, 3 years after, we have now 87. I mean, in some very few years, we have 3 million more people living below the line of poverty. So I think the fight against poverty must remain certainly a major fight of the European Commission and European Union. And I would say that I have not heard a lot about the few instruments European give to work on the social field. ESF, FEAD, and we'd like to know if you think it could be reinforced, because to have an answer to this situation, we must have tools, and we have to have more money. And the next plan, program, financial budget for this program from 2020 to 2027, we have the same amount of money that the last 6 former years. And inside the envelope, the food heads is going to decrease from between 1/3 and the half of the envelope. So I think we have to add some signal about what it is being to be done in order to fight poverty, which is increasing in Europe.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to give the floor back to the speakers. I'll start maybe with you, Katharina, because some of the questions were very much in your direction to answer. And then I'll give the floor to the rest of you as well, just in line if that's okay.
Thank you so much. On the first question, how can you influence? You know that we have the European semester process and that we follow closely what the member states are doing within our respective policies. Within the European semester process, starting from the joint employment report, annual growth survey, country reports, and then actually in the end country-specific recommendations, we identify the biggest challenges within the member states that need to be addressed. We can discuss if the CSRs have been sufficiently fulfilled, have they been fulfilled fast enough or fulfilled at all, but we have seen that that has driven many reforms in the area of pension policies, in the area of active labor market policies, and in the area of social policies as well. If you look at the CSRs, there is a huge increase since we introduced pillar on the social policy recommendations. Next step is to integrate pillar fully into the country reports and country-specific recommendations. And also the next step is to include SDGs as the part of the semester process. So this is our challenge for the future, and this is also for the member states to pay attention on. Regarding the minimum income, I only wanted to say that for us in the Commission, it is extremely important that we secure the minimum social safety net. That is what the minimum income is about. It can be defined, every member state has it. Each and every member state in the EU has some kind of safety net. The question is it sufficient? Is it adequate? Is it available? And could the people with this minimum safety net live more, less decent living? That is the question. And also link closely with a minimum income is, I think, steps that follow. How do we secure to include or reintegrate those in the labor market, those that have been away from the labor market for a while, how to involve and include the vulnerable groups that need a different approach. So therefore, we need to address the labor market policies, we need to address the systems, and it all represents a really unique package, so to speak. We heard many opposition, especially from the side of the trade unions, I would say, that want to divide the discussion on the minimum wage and the minimum income. Their arguments are that indeed the minimum wage is closely linked to the world of work, it's closely linked to the negotiations, it's closely linked to the involvement of the stakeholders, but the minimum income is nevertheless something that we always have to have in mind when we speak about fight against poverty. Sean, on your question, can we discuss it in this November or beginning of December? I think that would be better, and that would be the time when new commission is already, I think they announced that in December, the outline of the 5-year plan is going to be announced. So that is the question. But what everybody has been calling up, not only the civil society, but also for the member states and us in the commission, is indeed to have a really ambitious targets that we could reach and that all of the member states could commit. That is the most important. When we look 2020, we did not have any, I would say, obligation or any decision of the member states how much each member state would contribute to 20 million less in poverty. Maybe that is one of the reasons why now we are not there. But this is of course to be discussed. And thank you so much for pointing on the ESF Plus and the future multi-annual financial framework that is being negotiated. And I hope that Croats are going to finalize the negotiations and that Germans won't reach it because it would be just too long, and we want to launch the operational programs as soon as possible and adopt them so that really smooth transition from one financial period to another one could be made. You know very well that it's 101 billion, which is in absolute numbers more than it was in past. It's also still not defined. Would that remain? We are still waiting to see what will happen with 5 billion euro for the child guarantee. Maybe that would increase the overall envelope. I hope it won't be calculated within 101, but we never know until the Parliament, Council and agree, and the member states actually agree on the final outcomes. In present programming period, the ring fencing for the social policy was 20%. We are proposing 25, and I think 25. The Parliament asked for even 30, I think, but I'm not sure if that was adopted in their last decision. So among those, 3% are for the FEAD. Present FEAD, so material and food assistance. So it is increase when you think about it in the percentages and in the line. The fact is, due to convergence, some of the member states are going to receive less money than they had in past. But we are there achieving convergence. The GDP, the level conditions goes up, and this is also reflected in the funds. We also have to have in mind that actions within the social window could be done in the ERDF, so-called priority objective 4, which is social policy, has a really large space for the social investments in infrastructure. And we also have InvestEU. InvestEU is meant for several products that will be closely linked to all of your fields, starting from long-term care, starting from housing, starting from social entrepreneurship, promoting inclusion of vulnerable groups back to the labor market, persons with disabilities. So there are going to be a variety of opportunities to address the fields, and still to be seen what will happen with the Just Transition Fund. The Just Transition Fund is supposed to be 15 billion, 5 billion that would be somehow contributed from ESF Plus and the ERDF, 5 billion fresh money, and another 5 billion of the national co-financing. So this is also going to be a powerful tool to address the challenges. But I think what's also very important to have in mind, many things in the social field are related to the social policies. And for the social policies, the member states are going to have, presently called SRSS. In the future, I'm not sure how is it going to be called, but it's also 20 billion for strategic reforms. And I think that's a substantial money if we look for the member states to use to prepare and to run the first phase of the implementation of the reforms. So altogether, I wouldn't say that money is not a problem. Money is always a problem. What is very important is to prioritize, and to prioritize well. And I hope by the action plan for the pillar and during the negotiations with the member states, we will clearly see how they guide the fight against poverty, because it is guided at the EU level, but as my Finnish colleague has said, it is strong national competence. So it's only working together we could get somewhere. Sorry.
Well, I didn't interrupt you because many of the questions were really for you, like you could cover, and and especially when you came on to the question of funding, I thought it was very relevant to let you continue. So
I can be more brief because I got a quite specific question whether the German presidency would be willing and prepared to address a framework of minimum income benefits within the European Union. And the answer is short and clear: yes, we are. In case you want to see that black on white, you can look it up in the first chapter of the German coalition agreement of our government at the moment. And my minister has a mandate to work in the European Union for this framework of minimum wages. We already talked about that, but also for a framework of minimum income benefits. So yes, but if you see primary law and the mandate of the European Commission, it is a weak one in that respect, to be honest. We have Council recommendations from the past addressing these issues, and Germany would love to see this updated somehow, but we don't know yet what the Commission is going to table here. From my point of view, we can't afford to stay with Europe where the disparities go further and further and get worse and worse. 1 of 10 European is at risk of poverty at the moment, and a system of a convergence of social benefit systems is an important instrument to fight that. Lots of Europeans do not face upward convergence but downward convergence, and this is the instrument we should use. But we know that we need to have all member states on board for a council recommendation, and this is not so easy, to be quite frank.
Okay. Thank you for all my colleague Ivankovic, Knežević answer our question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll just briefly answer to the question that was really straightforward to me or to Finland. I must say that I am really sad and depressed to hear about those experiences that you had. And I think that it only sort of like underlines the need for the work that we are doing, and sort of like brings the point of view that this whole idea of economy of well-being, it's not only fight against poverty, it's also like a fight for more trust towards future, also for the middle class people. You know, the whole phenomenon of like Trump or like all these populist right-wing parties rising in the whole Europe, and all the prejudices and racism. I think it's sort of like a sign of the unrest and uncertainty of people towards their future, and towards or the feeling that they are not sure whether they are going to keep their position in the society, their status in the society. So that is the reason why we need this whole economy of well-being approach, and the work and the fight for like social security, you know, even broader than just like fight against poverty, you know, to bring the feeling of security to people. I think that would be the sort of like the key against racism and prejudice. And, you know, this experience just shows that Finland is not ready, and it's not a paradise, and we have a lot to do also in here.
Well, I'd like to share a couple of remarks. First of all, I must thank all the participants for bringing forward these important questions. And this is evidence of what we've been saying before. how important civil society to be intrinsically involved and to be heard and consulted, because really all these questions reflect that civil society is at the heart of our societies, is the grassroots, and can bring in real time and bring to light in real time the concerns of our peoples in Europe. To put another context to what have been said about poverty, one of our colleagues here has mentioned a couple of indicators going back to 2008, if I remember, and 2018. We have 24 million children in Europe at risk of poverty and social exclusion. If we're not going to tackle the issue of poverty by breaking cycles, we will continue, we'll never win over this scourge of society, because poverty is intergenerational. And that is the reason that we are hopeful at Eurochild about the commitment of President von der Leyen and the child guarantee. This is how important it is. We need to break the cycle of poverty, and we need to invest in our children. Otherwise, research shows us that it is intergenerational. We're worried about funds. I'm more worried of how we spend those funds available. Are we socially investing, sustainably investing, or just spending the funds? We need to sustainably invest to break cycles of poverty. And that's why, again, the child guarantee is our hope for the future. Even the issue of a change of mentality. Of course, so long as inequalities prevail in our midst, we will have the populist who will thrive on fear and create confusion in the minds of very reasonable people, people like us, who might be afraid of seeing somebody wearing an ethnic Roma dress. I can assure you that these prejudices are all over Europe, not just in Finland. But thank you, Minister, for being so honest about it. And I think we need to realize that populism have risen in Europe because inequalities prevail. And populists thrive on fear, thrive on misinformation, and create fear and confusion. So breaking cycles of poverty, addressing inequality, the European pillar of social rights should be the fundamental way forward. And that is why I commended Finland for the economy of well-being. This coining of words, you're opening doors. I'm pleased about the Croatian presidency of putting a focus on poverty, please child poverty as well. So very important. Let's bring to the fore what is happening to our children. To continue to mention just another indicator, which should be worrying us, all of us, with regards to children. We have 4 million of our children who are experiencing common mental health problems. That is in the age of 10 to 19. And 17 million children, 10 to 19, who are experiencing a whole spectrum of mental health problems within our midst. So the issue of poverty has to have all the dimensions. If we want to break cycles, the cycle, and we need to break cycle, we need to hit poverty on the head to break the cycle. Therefore, and in so doing, we will also be addressing the change in mentality that we so much need, so that those people who are thriving on our fears and nurturing fear within our societies will have no food to be nourished with. And finally, I want to also commend Germany for discussing the adequacy of pensions. Please remember gender pay gap. That's very important, because if today, due to a prevailing working poor, it's a new class which we have created in the process. It's a new class. We are getting workers who have worked all their lives and ending up with real insufficient pension. We will soon be seeing women, it's not just encouraging women to go to work, but also to have equity in their wages, because gender pay gap is creating an inequality in itself and also could impact on the feminization of poverty at a later stage when at the pensionable age. Lastly, we need civil society to be there, and thank you, Social Platform, for being there, bringing so many civil society organizations together. But we need to have our politicians help civil society so that it will have the capacity to create that active, or rather continue to strengthen that active citizenship which we so much need, so as to ensure that our authorities and governments, with all due respect to all governments, politicians, I've been a politician in my other life for a very long time, so I know exactly what a politician passed through. And we tend as politicians to forget a bit, but we need civil society to continue to bring to the fore, give visibility to this scourge in our society, inequality and poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and you will have got a flavour today of the what Social Platform bring to European policymaking, talking about the issues concerning people. There was maybe one thing which wasn't raised that I just want to say in the end, because it was especially touching, I think, for all of us, the fact that people, just on the basis of how they look today in Europe, can be discriminated. And we're still waiting after 11 years for a horizontal equal treatment legislation. And Social Platform is a combination of social and also human rights NGOs. That is something that we will also be expecting advancement of from the new commission, from the upcoming presidencies, because these are gaps that contribute to poverty and marginalization, and as you said, the intergenerational effects. So this is another element of the solution, I think, where the EU has got some action it can take. So thank you very much, all of you, to the speakers, and to all of the participants. You have a coffee break now, which is until 10:30, but I don't know if we have a little bit of space in that. I'll give the floor back to Therese.
We have a very busy panel, actually, so I'm going to ask you to not stretch the limit. So 10:30, I want you to direct your steps back to the room. So if we can start 10:35, that'll be fine, but please don't stay any longer. You have some fruit and some coffee. You can take it in a flying speed. Thank you very much.
again the moderator is that you are speaking over to with you. Okay. Speaker. Interventions. Okay. That's fine. You have full freedom to be welcome here.
I need contact and
Right.
Honorable guests, if you will please start moving to your seats. We're going to start in 1 minute. So we're only 8 minutes late, which is actually very good. So we are then gonna do the final panel of this conference. And this time, I mean, we have just heard decision makers, policy makers, and we have talked about their action plans and their plans for proposals and legislation. But social justice cannot be achieved through social policies alone. And some of the speakers here today are going to make the case that we also need a shift in Europe's economic model and move towards a mindset set on sustainable development and a different kind of ideological frame to this whole idea. We're going to talk about the Finnish presidency's economy for well-being a little bit more and what that entails. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, with me, I have 5 distinguished panelists. And the first speaker we have is Enrico Giovannini, who is an economist, a statistician. He is also the former Italian Minister of Labour and Social Policies, and he also has a past in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So who better to start this panel than Mr. Giovannini? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad, of course, that the Finnish presidency is now pushing for the economy of well-being. 15 years after the first event we organized in Palermo at the OECD, which started the series of World Fora all over the world on these kind of issues. Frankly speaking, I'm really very happy that there could be a council decision about that, or at least a council opinion. The point is that in the meantime, the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda has become I would say, the mainstream, at least in theory. This is why I would, first of all, recommend, in terms of language, to have a clear connection between the two, because now, finally, after the great change in the Commission in terms of focusing on 2030 Agenda, the risk is that talking about something else, people will be a little bit confused. Beside that, I think that Europe is really at the beginning, I hope, of a new cycle which has been strongly pushed by, I think, all of us. And maybe you have seen the report that the Independent Commission on Sustainable Inequality, or Sustainable Equality actually, has produced a few months ago. And I'm very happy that some of our recommendations have been really embedded in the program of the new Commission and the letters to commissioners. First of all, the reorganization of the European semester around the 2030 Agenda. And I'm also glad that the commissioner in charge of this is the former Italian Prime Minister, with whom I worked very well. And I really think that this is the most important challenge from a governance point of view that the European Union has. I've been trying to sell this idea with the old Commission since 2016, and I failed. And also when I was minister, I tried also with Ursula von der Leyen, who was Minister of Labor, together when we started the youth guarantee in practice, doing the front loading of funds in June 2013, I was saying that I fight against the resistances by economists, by the Commission, especially the cabinet of President Juncker, who didn't want to open this Pandora box. Why? Because it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare to coordinate the different councils formations. It's a nightmare to make the European Commission services working together around 2030 agenda. And 3 years have been lost because of the resistance of the former Commission. So I'm really hopeful that now things will be changing. But to change this, you need 3 fundamental points. First, political commitment and push from the rest of the world, which means us, which means the civil society organizations. Second, a strong leadership from inside the Commission to tackle the technical problems, for example, in developing assessment tools that can evaluate the different policies in an integrated way. And this is not the situation so far. I'm consultant to the Commission, JRC, the Joint Research Center, which manages the models through which forecasts, policy evaluations are made. And again, because of the block over the last 3 years, we lost 3 years in integrating the different models. So if you want to simulate one particular policy, it's very difficult to understand the impact, not on macroeconomic variables, which is normally done, but on income distribution, on CO2 emissions, and all the other indicators that cover the 2030 agenda. The third point, the third ingredient that we need is the change of mindset in the Parliament and in the Council. Again, the report, Sustainable Equality, that we have prepared for the Socialist and Democratic Party or group contains more than 100 proposals on how to change European policies, but the appendix describes how the new European semester could work. And of course, you need to engage the different council formations and the Parliament. And again, this means that they have to rebuild their internal organizations in order first, at national level, to be ready to have an integrated approach instead of having ministries of environment, labor, and so on and so forth, just dealing with their council formations. And also within the Parliament, because the commissions, the different committees, the different committees do not have this kind of integrated approach. So if Europe, and I can stop here if you wish, really wants to become the champion of sustainable development, as I hope and as it could be from a governance point of view, a lot of work needs to be done beside the specific interventions, directives, regulations that I hope now will be prepared. The policy coherence for sustainable development is the most difficult challenge, but this is why it's so important that we work together on this. We pick up the good practices also elsewhere. Look at New Zealand, for example, which has restructured its public budget, government budget, according to the different categories of well-being, or Italy, which has embedded in our budget law process the indicators of equitable and sustainable well-being, obliging the government to make projections covering 12 key indicators out of the 130 that we had developed when I was president of the Italian Statistical Office. So this is the new challenge. Urgent, but really needed. And is where I think the civil society can contribute, but also watch out what the Commission will be doing in order to have this truly integrated approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giovannini. I would like to just very quick follow-up question to your speech there. You talk about the 3-year blockage in the Commission. Now we have a new Commission, but it hasn't come in yet. But you still seem optimistic about a new approach. What are the signs? What was the blockage due to, and what are the signs for you to be optimistic about the incoming Commission?
Just based on my previous experience, the reason why there was this kind of opposition to change was because the 10 priorities of the Juncker's Commission were selected once forever. And they didn't want to move 1 inch from their 10 priorities, which doesn't mean that they have not done a lot of very good things, but in terms of integrated thinking, they didn't want to do it. So if I have to extrapolate this behavior, now the 2030 agenda is like the 10 priorities, I'm sure that they will follow up with the same consistency. No, I'm joking, of course. I really hope that this is not a joke. But I see a difference now also in the Commission services and in the Parliament. I was in Brussels last week. And it's clear that now everybody is scratching his or her head on how to implement that. What I really wouldn't like to see is that, as in the past, Commission services and people from the Commission were very precisely describing what they were doing as if that was perfect. And now I hope that they will be doing the right things, but also trying to understand why they were not doing it before. You see what I mean? So because big organizations like the Commission, but also governments, tend to really eventually jump to a different model without really understanding what was the blocking factor. By the way, let me recommend you to read the report Thinking the Unthinkable, which is one of the best possible reports I ever seen in my life, especially describing why in the current culture, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, the group thinking is the most important obstacle to prepare ourselves to non-linearities. And the future, unfortunately, will be full of non-linearities on economic, social, and environmental dimensions. If we believe that we are not on a sustainable path, this is why we need the 2030 agenda, the future will be full of non-linearities and shocks. This is why we need to prepare ourselves to go beyond the group thinking.
So a lack of self-awareness and self-insights then from the outgoing Commission, and then a request for a little more contemplation from the new, so to summarize a little bit your demand.
Yes, indeed, also because I think this is the last call for Europe. I mean, the environment is already doing its revolution, but normally environmental revolutions do not cause the fall of governments, while economic and social revolutions do. And again, if we capture really the idea that sustainability is not only about environment, but we are facing risks for social, economic, and institutional unsustainabilities, which is the preamble of the 2030 agenda, this is really the last call, and we have to operate very quickly.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to now turn to the next speaker, which is representing our host city, Helsinki. Pia Pakarini, you're the City Deputy Mayor for Education. And I'm sure that nobody has missed that Finland tops every single graph of the best learning, best pupils, best results in the PISA studies. We're all very, very jealous. You are here to talk a little bit about your work, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Pia Pakarinen, and as she said, I'm Deputy Mayor for Education. And voice of the cities in this panel, I would say. I'm also, I was probably invited here because I'm vice chair for Eurocities Economic Development Forum. And previously, I worked for the Helsinki Region Chamber of Commerce. I was director there, and before that, I was CEO for Helsinki Entrepreneurs. So I've been looking at these things also from the economic growth point of view. Now, why is the voice of cities important? I think that the cities have a vitally important role in preventing the climate change and the segregation, which in my opinion are the worst problems that are facing the cities at the moment. And the cities have somehow become more important players than the countries themselves. So the big decisions are made in the cities. And for instance, in Helsinki, we have, as the second country in the world and the first in Europe, started reporting our attainment of our SDG goals voluntarily to United Nations, which started in summer. So we are really, we have actually noticed that our city strategy is very, in very many points, very similar as the SDG goals. So it was not very difficult to start reporting on attainment these goals. But of course, education, since I'm the Deputy Mayor for Education, well, that's pretty much the answer to any problem that there is in the world, of course, facing those both the most serious problems, because segregation, which is, I'm happy about that, is not the worst in Finland, because of education. So traditionally in Finland, the profession of the teacher is highly valued. We educate the teachers very well. Those who have the best abilities for leadership they become principals, and because of this, we can really give a lot of freedom to the schools. And all our schools are free of charge, even if they have a kind of foundation, if they are somehow in private schools, they are free of charge. So our history has been that no matter what your background is, you have the same possibilities to become whatever you want in your career, and that's because of education. So I'm very often asked, why do we score so high in the results? I think that as a small nation, we have noticed that we can't leave any part, like 50% of the population, as we mean we can't leave them apart, we can't leave anyone apart, we have to have everyone in the same boat, and that's why I have this kind of very equal education system, which also has been a way to avoid segregation. But as I said, cities have a very important role in solving the biggest questions of the world, and that's where we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, a very quick follow-up for you then in your specific field, representing the city of Helsinki, but also the education area. The pillar of social rights, the question, the theme of this panel was, is it fit to introducing this model? What do you think about the possibilities of introducing your example?
Yes, I think it is fit, because as I said, the goals that we have in our city strategy are very similar. And what is the city's role? For instance, we are a big buyer in the market, so we can really influence what is happening in the markets in that way. And also, our city wants to be a test bed or platform for innovation. So a city is a platform for everything that is done, and I think that it is very fit for that purpose.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Madame Claire Edon. You are the president of ATD Carmonde. You are a journalist originally, but you are now you're still a journalist. Okay, very good. Once a journalist, never anything else. You are also a writer of several books on health. The latest one is here. I read from the program La Vérité sur vos médicaments. So I'm imagining that you're in the health sector. And please tell us more.
Thanks. Maybe I can switch on one. I imagine if you invite me, is that you think that we can't build a social Europe without poor people themselves. So I guess that's the beginning. I have two things to say. First of all, what does that mean to live in poverty? And then maybe what can we do? And I will give one example, especially on work. In Europe, we say that the main measure of poverty line, you know, is 60% of national minimum income. And we always think that living in poverty means living with lack of money. We tend to see the material deprivation as the main problem of people living in poverty, which is partly true, but it's not enough to say that. Poverty is not only economic, it's also multidimensional, with difficulties to access to right to housing, to work, access to health, good quality education. And all of these work together. As you said, you can't work on one side if you don't work on all of these sides. And ATD Forward recently carried out a participatory study on dimensions of poverty in partnership with the University of Oxford, and which including participation of people living in poverty. And this project took place in 6 countries from the north. It was France, United Kingdom, United States, and from the south, Tanzania, Bolivia, and Bangladesh. And this research was called the Hidden Dimensions of Poverty. And I want to say some of the result of that. Some of the hidden dimensions of poverty are suffering in body, mind, and earth. People are really suffering. Second thing, there is struggle and resistance against poverty. And also unrecognized contribution, means that poor people, they work, they fight themselves against poverty. The fourth point was about institutional and social mistreatment that could be inside discrimination, that poor people are discriminated because they are poor, even if we don't realize that. And they feel that they're seen as inferior or incapable, afraid to be seen as lazy person doing nothing. And maybe it's also the way that some of the people see them. It's not only their feeling. And I have to say, I have two things to say about that. So we need to fight against stereotypes, stigmatization. Fighting against poverty, it's also fighting against discrimination. And in that fight, we can't win if we don't work with the poor people themselves. And this point is very important. We can't decide for them or we'll be wrong. So what can we do when we know what is really living in poverty? We can take several examples about housing or access to good quality education. I don't want to take that because Finland is so much better. So I think I didn't want to take an example about that. And I think to speak about access to work, which is very important. And I want to speak about territories without long-term unemployed. I don't know if you heard about this project. The idea consists in erasing long-term unemployment by transferring its cost to social and local innovations that create employment. In France, the cost of unemployment is 43 billion euros per year. It's 80,000 euros per person unemployed. And you can guess it's not what people receive in their pocket. This amount is composed of 1/3 of welfare benefits, 1/3 of loss of revenues for the states in taxes or social contributions, and 1/3 of social consequences of unemployment in the domain of housing, health, safety, child welfare, and this part, in fact, is much more difficult to evaluate. And this project is based on 3 assumptions. First, money is not an issue. We saw just it before. We have, in fact, the money because unemployment costs a lot. Second, there is not shortage of work. There is shortage of jobs, which is not exactly the same thing. We all know that there are some jobs, some works that will be useful for the society, but that don't have enough value and cost quite a lot. So how this project works? A law was voted unanimously by the French Parliament to begin this experimentation. This saying in one sentence, in fact, took 4 years. Because you imagine that to convince the government and the parliament to begin this experimentation was quite difficult. Then 10 territories have been selected, small territories, 5,000 to 10,000 inhabitants. A local committee was created with local institutions, the state administration, the companies, the social actors, the associations, the employment office. And this local committee has 3 objectives. First of all, build and maintain local consensus about this project. This works only if we work all together. Second, identify the long-term unemployed. And third, identify useful and new activities, because those activities has to be in competition with existing activities. That's important. So in each of the 10 territories, a company was created, which creates permanent employment contract at guaranteed minimum wage. Each EBE, I would say in French and translate in English, EBE, entreprise à but d'emploi, which we can translate employment purpose company. So the purpose of the company is not the same. It's not to make money only. And each company receives from the states 8,000 euros per person employed. The activities that they are developed are very varied. Exploitation of wood, recycling, activities related to energy transition, services to person and concierge, development of local shops, plenty of works very different. So how are we 2 years later? 800 persons are employed. People deprived of job, first of all, they want to work. Then they say that working changed totally their life. Sure, they have more money, but moreover, they look at themselves differently, thinking that they are able to do something to be useful for the others. Children look also at them also differently. Same for the neighbors. Their faces changed. We have a documentary on that. You can see their face before working and after. It's totally changed. You can't recognize them. And also the territories change because more cohesion in population. So what could be the next step? First of all, we ask for an extension of the experimentation because 10 territories is not enough. We need 50. The President Macron said yes, but we can't see anything from now, so we are quite worried. Then a third step would be the creation, as we called, a right of option. That is to say the possibility for any territory to be part of the experiment without limitation of number. And now, really, if you want to know the target, is really to leave no one behind. We really want territories without unemployed people. And this is not so easy to leave no one behind, and we really have to work on it. And last thing I wanted to say, we really show in this project that fight against poverty is connected to environmental protection. And we can work on the hand of the month and on hand of the world together. And that's a very important question for us, because I totally agree that we have now to work together, fighting against global warming and fighting against poverty.
Thank you very much. A couple of really tangible results there from somewhat an experiment in exactly what we're talking about, a different mindset, a different economic model, I'm wondering, just a quick follow-up to you as well, are you spreading this experience with your European colleagues? And do you think, if again back to the subject here, do you think that the work with the social pillar and Agenda 2030 is somewhere where you can put in your experience and reach results?
Yes, we will be very happy if some other countries can work also on that project. We have some contact in Belgium and some other countries. So yes, and we really need to do this experimentation in different places, because it's really the beginning. It's not, you can imagine that it's not so easy to build a company with 80 people who are not been working for the last 2, 3, or 5 years. So we need to experiment in different places, rural areas, city areas. And yes, we really want to try to do this kind of thing in other countries in Europe. And we are in contact with some of them.
Just a very quick comment. The first one, the difference between jobs and work is extremely important. I think that Luke will say something about that, because in the Global Commission on the Future of Work, with the new definition that the ILO is going to implement all over the world, everything which is not sleeping or eating and so on is work. And then you have paid or unpaid. So this change of mindset is extremely important. And the second point is about the 2030 agenda in Europe. I would like to remind you that when the Europe 2020 strategy was developed, there was a war, I would say, about the definition of the indicator on poverty. And Germany and others refused absolutely to accept an indicator of absolute poverty, pushing for the current indicator of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion. But if you want to apply the 2030 agenda, you must define a level of absolute poverty. So this is going to be a huge discussion, I think, in the next year or so, but it's fundamental if we want to have a European approach to poverty fight.
And I think one of the people who will be part of that discussion is the next speaker, who is Mr. Luc Kortebeek, who is, as we heard, from the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and about a reform of socio-economic thinking, the fit, if the social pillar is fit for purpose, etc. Please, your take.
Thank you. And of course, we worked in the same commission, the Commission on the Future of Work, because we are existing now 100 years as ILO. And if you're looking back to the past, in fact, I didn't believe it, but we are living in a better world. Anyway, if you are comparing a lot of things, there is less extreme poverty, there is less child labor, there are a lot of things that we realize. I have to tell this because also for unionists, we have to tell this, and also for activists, that we can change things. It's important to tell people that we can do something, that we can change the problems we are living with. And that's why I think we have to, and I'm on the same line with my colleagues, that we have to look to the different challenges and the climate challenge. And I think that for the commissioners, the climate challenge was in fact the most important. More important than the digitalization, for example. Digitalization is an important challenge, but climate is the first. And then, of course, we have inequality, and equality and poverty. And I agree totally. It's not only a question of material poverty, it's also a question of what do we mean in society? What is our influence in society? And if we look to the middle classes at this moment in Europe, they're going backwards. On the material level, but also on the influence they have. And this is really a problem. This is what they feel, and this is what we see. This is the populism. These are the yellow jackets and so on. And we have to take this in account. Of course, digitalization is important. It's not, in the first place, a question of quantity of jobs. It's more a question, as for climate, a question of transition. Which transition, and we are in at this moment, how do we manage this? How do we work with people who we need no more, and we need other people? And what do we do? How do we work with them? How do we guide them? And these are, with this we made 10 recommendations with the ILO Commission, and different. For example, we said, okay, technology is very important, and maybe we have to think how technology can help people. Of course, we have to learn, and lifelong learning is important, but how can we adapt the technology and work towards people? Work is very important. We discussed it. Work, the different kinds of work, because not only on the material level, but also for what do we what is our role in society? And people want to speak. The first thing that people speak about is their work. What are they doing? That's what we are asking. What are you doing? And so people want to tell this and want to be important. So also for the self-fulfilling for people, it's very important to have work. So work is important, and the quality of work will be important. And if you look, for example, it's only one example to the platform economy at this moment. We will not avoid it, but we have to regulate it. And we cannot make the same mistake as we made already with the globalization. It will work itself. No, we need some regulation. That's why we ask for a convention on the platform economy. And I told already yesterday to this group also the importance of demography, not only our demographic situation, but also the demography of our neighbors, Africa, for example. And all these things, and a lot of problems that we have at this moment, the driver behind is the short-termism of the economy, the shareholder value model. And this is the biggest problem we have to work with. And the question now is, how do you bring, and I agree with all of you, how do we bring all these challenges together? I think that we have to work together, and we need an integrated vision on this. But who dares to tell it to the people, to our people in general, in a period where short-term expectation count and not the long term? So it will be important, and of course for our politicians, for your work, civil society, for unions, employers' organizations, how do we explain this to people? So we do not need anymore the sliced approach, but we need to have a general vision, and we need to give some perspective to people who do not believe anymore in any institutions. And we are also part of these institutions. So this is really the challenge we have to live with. For Europe, maybe one question to Europe. What I've seen, in fact, Europe was behind not only Europe, but a lot of of our countries were behind the realization, the foundation of the ILO 100 years ago. But if I'm and they lead it, in fact, because we had something called as a European social model, and all the others needed us. What I've seen now for the last 10 years in the ILO is that the European Union doesn't exist anymore. We do not come up anymore for our model, and we need this really. If I can call the European and the Finnish, Finland, the Finnish presidency, what can you do? I think that with the European Union and with the diplomats in Brussels and in Geneva, we have to work. If on all these challenges, if Europe can come up with good positions, I think that some of the other countries anyway, some of the other regions will follow rather Europe than others. So it is important to have this vision and to know. And now our countries, they're looking to each other all the time instead of playing the first role.
Thank you very much. So a really quick follow-up to you as well. So the European Union is dead, you said, doesn't exist anymore. That's very harsh words. So I'm wondering, again, using this European Pillar of Social Rights, for instance, do you think that you, with that document in your hand, could you then define what a job is compared to a work, or a fair salary, or a good job, or leaving nobody behind in the labor area?
I think that it's possible to work with the 20 principles, but come up for this and believe in this. And so then you have to come up, and in institutions as multilateral organizations, as the ILO, you can play a role. Europe doesn't have all a lot of social competencies, but can play a role to regulate more. And so this can help Europe too, because we did it in the past for the rest of the world. At this moment, we need it too. We need also this regulation for our countries too. So I think it's important that we play this role. And of course, I expect that also social partners can play a role. And one of the problems at this moment is that from employer side, and we could see it in the Commission and also in the conference of June, that the International Employers Organization, but also Business Europe, I think that they are counting, they're telling we have Brexit, we have the trade wars at this moment. It's not the moment to give international European or multilateral organizations more power to intervene in our countries. We want to avoid this. I think that this is their thinking at this moment. And we have known them at other moments, because I do not think that they realize what the problems and the risks are. These are not only societal risks, but also risks for the economy if people do not believe anymore in our societies.
Thank you very much. And we're going to turn to our last speaker in this panel. It's Mr. Leo Williams, here to my right. He is the director of the European Anti-Poverty Network and also a member of the Social Platforms Management Committee. And you are going to speak to us more specifically, maybe about the economic models that should be endorsed or not. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe just to start, I mean, I feel a little bit like some of the things I'm going to say are a little bit in the framework of being a bit like the Luxembourg Prime Minister with Boris Johnson next to me. We're trying to make recommendations to governments, to institutions, and many of them have left. So we're kind of empty lecturing some of the governments here. So it's good that at least there's the high-level conference afterwards that we can take some of the messages to as well. And then maybe just to respond quickly to Luc, I mean, one of your points was who dares to challenge the kind of economic norms and the economic models that we have now. I guess to me, I see lots of challenges to those economic norms these days. I mean, we mentioned New Zealand, for example, which is turning the economy on its head a little bit in their country, the way they do their budgeting. Finland is talking about the economy of well-being. It's looking to change it completely. The SDGs don't go far enough on the economic model side of things, but it's almost there. And I think with the student strikes around the climate, the climate, everything that's going to be happening with the Just Transition Fund, I think there is a moment where we are challenging this. We are talking about this, and these are precisely the moments. And it's us in these rooms who are making these challenges as well. And I think maybe then for the social platform and the members of the platform, we have quite clear positions. It's clear for the platform that our current economic systems don't serve social justice. And I think it's really important for us to labour that point. And the evidence is really clear for all of us around here to see. Many of the interventions from the floor in the previous panel, highlighted the fact that in Europe, one of the richest places in the world, we've got an economic system which allows over 100 million people to live at risk of poverty and social exclusion. So we've got this smart, sustainable, inclusive growth strategy. Our market-led growth model, it just doesn't deliver for people and planet, and it just doesn't serve social justice. So we know, as the platform and as our members, we know that this trickle-down economics just doesn't work. But I think the good news is that we have this system of economic growth, which has been designed by us, by people, by humans, and it's a program that it's a system that can be reprogrammed. It's not an inevitable system. It's a system which is designed by humans, by human choices, and it's something that can be changed. So as the platform, we're convinced that a just economy is possible, and there's a few key priorities for the platform and its members that need to be prioritized. And this is the kind of empty lecturing part where we're making the recommendations to governments to do X, Y, and Z, so you can be Boris. So the first is kind of ensuring the provision of quality employment. And here, it's an economy which focuses on job security, on adequate minimum wages, on protection of health and well-being of employees, of skills improvement, and of work-life balance. And maybe just to focus on one of these, I think, we see within the College of Commissioners, we see the commitment to propose this legal instrument to ensure that all workers in the union will have a fair minimum wage, which is great. And we should be seeing this legal proposal within the first 100 days of the Commission. So what we're wanting to see with that is to really establish that at a clear minimum 60% of national median wage. So that's one, I think, really clear ask in terms of the economic models we have. That needs to be in place. But again, what many colleagues from throughout the room have said, that what's missing in the commitments at the moment, and what we're all quite happy that our German colleagues very clearly said that, yes, they are prepared to commit to this, is a minimum income floor as well, minimum income scheme across Europe, which we all know is really crucial to allow people to live lives in dignity. So for many of us around, I think that was quite a big public commitment from the German government to say, yes, we are going to continue with this. Yes, we are going to push this through. So hopefully all of us around here are going to stand with the German government and help push that forwards. And I think that's also then a call from all of us to other governments to get on board and to realize that this is not a case of trying to bring down their maximum standards in the Nordic countries, but it's a case of trying to ensure that all countries put in place these adequate minimum income schemes which are accessible and which allow for dignified for people to live their lives in dignity. It's really just the political will which is needed. We know that this is allowed in the treaties. It's really a case of political will. So we're hoping that Germany is going to help us build that. We speak a lot about minimum wages, but I think some social platform members, including my own just this weekend, are starting to speak about maximum wages as well. It's really easy to focus on the lowest levels of society, right? But it's much harder to start challenging the wealth to create. But if you want to really create systemic changes to our economy, we've got to be thinking about the highest earners as well. So considering either doing things like establishing maximum wages or effective maximum wages with much higher levels of tax than we see at the moment. These aren't new ideas. These used to happen in various countries 20, 30 years ago. And doing this would just really allow us to meaningfully tackle the growing problem of wealth inequality in our continent, and would enable us to provide stronger redistribution measures to finance our social systems. The second kind of big priority for the platform then is prioritizing social economy. We know that this provides concrete evidence that it is possible to conduct business in a way that puts people and the environment before profit. Social economy and social enterprises really contribute to the social and professional inclusion of people in vulnerable situations, and they prioritize social objectives over profit. And we know that that's for the benefit of the community. So basically, social enterprises, they do sell products, they do sell services on the market, but they're committed to producing a positive social impact. The third main point, and I think it's really when we're talking about building a fair economy which serves social justice, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, and we've not really spoken about it much on this panel before today, just now. But I feel a little bit like Rutger Bergman at the World Economic Forum a few months ago. We can't be at a conference of firefighters where we never talk about water. Tax. We know, even within the Commission quotes on their website, tax fraud and tax evasion represents a huge problem and affects each and every European citizen. The problem knows no borders and can only be solved effectively with concerted joint effort. Huge sums are being lost due to tax evasion and tax avoidance. Estimates go up to 1 trillion euros. 1 trillion euros, people. Everything that we've been talking about here, MFF, etc. 1 trillion euros we're losing to tax evasion and tax avoidance. So let's talk more about tax and tax justice. It's a huge problem, huh? Like that kind of money, those kind of funds, if they actually, even if you collect 1%, 10% of that, that could be rediverted to social justice. But the good news, I think, is, and I'm going to link this back to our EAPN conference the other day, where the UN Special Rapporteur on Poverty and Human Rights was talking about the political salience and the political sellability of these kind of things. And I think the good news for me anyway is that these kind of things are becoming more and more politically salient, more politically sellable, more politically viable. Because it's clear, like normal Europeans are just totally in favor of cracking down on tax evasion, on tax avoidance, on insisting that multinationals pay their fair share of tax. But now it's not just normal Europeans are saying this as well. It's also the new president of the Commission is saying this. She's said very clearly in her political guidelines that she's going to make this an issue. She has commissioners who have this in their mission letters. She says, and I quote, "I'll step up the fight against tax fraud and make our action against harmful tax regimes in third countries stronger." She's going to try to change the voting system around tax issues. She's going to try to make that a qualified majority. Whether that is going to happen is another question, but the political will seems to be much more there on the table. So I think we have a bit of an opportunity on these issues, and I think as the platform we have some political space for this. Maybe just to sum up with a couple of points. We heard our colleague Reit from the SPC, from the Social Protection Committee yesterday, really clearly saying that social justice can't be achieved only through social policies. It just requires a fundamental shift of the current mainstream vision and the functioning of our economic model. It's really clear then for all of us, I think, that the integration of economic and social policies is really crucial if we're going to achieve an economic model that's socially inclusive and sustainable. And I think in order to have these kind of things discussed at the highest level, we're going to reiterate our call on member states, on the European Parliament, to organise an annual social summit that would take stock of social developments at the EU level, including things like tax justice, and to keep the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the social pillar really at the top of priority setting. I think this is an absolutely crucial thing for member states, the Commission and the Parliament to do, and I hope that can be a key outcome of the conference, and I wish that the presidencies were still here to be hearing that. Thank you.
Well, since you referred to me as Boris Johnson there for a moment, I think I would just like to say, if I were Boris Johnson, and I am playing the devil's advocate here, I would probably say minimum wage? No, but employment is going to be too expensive. Prices are going to go up. The food is going to be more expensive for the poor. If I were the Swedish Prime Minister, I would probably say minimum wage. Don't touch our Scandinavian way of collective bargaining system to set wages. If I were the Estonian Prime Minister, I would probably say, don't you touch our tax system. We have the lowest company tax in Europe, and we're gaining huge benefits from that, 13%. Don't you come here and touch. I could go on with each and every prime minister, just showing you a little bit, of course, what you already know, this jungle of defense mechanism that each and every country will have their own that they put into your argument. Quick comment?
Luke mentions like the influence of the middle class, the influence of civil society. one of our people experiencing poverty, one of our leaders in the European Anti-Poverty Network, a couple of days ago at our political conference, was asked what her dream was, and her response was that we collectively are so powerful that those responses, those defense mechanisms, they can't ignore these things anymore. And I think we have a long way to go for that, but I think it's a really key point. Like, we need to be having the strength and the power and the force to be able to get over those things, because clearly Google, Amazon, Facebook, Luxembourg, etc., tax havens are massively powerful, and clearly they're going to protect their financial interests. But they have the money, but they don't have the people on their side.
Mr. Giovannini, you want to make a quick intervention?
Yes. After the Fridays for Future, strikes by students and so on, and at the end of the month, we will launch in Italy the Saturdays for Future, which is about changing our consumption and production ways. But there is still the rest of the week that should be used for. So why don't we think Monday or Wednesday or whatever day at European level? No, I'm serious. To call the attention on this. We should learn from what the students have done. And when we say we have thousands and thousands, even the movie before, of people in Europe who are part of civil society, what if we decide that one single day, every single week, or whatever, every 2 months, or whatever, we do something on the social pillar?
Do you also have an intervention? Please.
I want to react about taxes. This is always in France, when we ask more for poor people, the government say we don't have enough money. We would like to do it. We don't have enough money. And in fact, it's a question of choice. In France, the government chose to delay the taxes on housing. We have a special tax like that, which I have to say the 15% poorest don't pay already. And he chose to delay this tax. So it's done for the 80% of the population. So for the last 20%, the richest, is going to do it in the next 2 or 3 years, which will cost 7 billion euros. I don't think it's necessary to do it for the richest. And so it's really a question of choice. And really, I agree with what you say about taxes. In fact, we have money. It's just a question of choice.
Would you like to comment?
Yes, this was also one of the discussions we had in Geneva, of course. And but look to the different business models. Also, if you look to the platform economy, so they are earning money, but they do not have workers. So they do not have any responsibility on workers, but they are only offering a platform. So not any responsibility for them. They are not responsible for their social security, for their future, for their wages. No, it's a competitive model. If you're giving a translation, maybe you are challenged by an Indian guy or lady to make it at another price and so on. So these things, and then they're earning money and they're not paying taxes for it. They're surfing all over the world without paying taxes. And they don't pay for the data they take from us. So look to all this. I think this is really important, and we are really challenged by you and by Breckman, for example, to speak about taxes. But it is forbidden to speak about taxes in our different countries. We can only lowering them, and of course for who? For who? For companies, because then we expect more employment. But it doesn't work like this. You see, we have reached some limits on these old ideas.
Right, we are going to open to the floor. We have half an hour, that's not bad. So still, keep your questions sharp and interesting. And as you have so far. And please raise your hand and tell me your name, who you represent, and which one of the panelists that you would like to pose your question to. Thank you. Usually you have so many hands in the air all the time. Has the air, have you pinched the balloon of your energy? Okay, but then I have a question for Mr. Williams. And it's a little bit about your expectations from this new commissioner. We have several commissioners that are going to be key into your area, which is, well, of course, Gentiloni, we have Timmermans, we have the employment commissioner, Schmidt, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about your view into the new commissioner and their possibilities?
We did a stakeholder analysis of this the other day when we had all of our members from all over Europe. So we've got kind of four commissioners that we're really going to be focusing on, I think. So Timmermans, who's obviously got the whole portfolio around the Green New Deal and the Just Transition Fund, but also politically throughout Europe is the head of the Socialists. So there's an added political importance there. Obviously, Nicolas Schmidt, who's the Commissioner for Jobs, but really, as Katharina was saying, in principle, that's still the DG of Employment and Social Affairs, and his mandate could probably be a bit stronger, but he's obviously going to be still a big focus. And he has minimum wage in his mandate letter. He has implementation of the social pillar in his mission letter, strengthening social protection in the mission letter. Doesn't have necessarily minimum income by name or poverty by name in there, but de facto, if you have a mission to implement the social pillar, you de facto have a mission to implement Principle 14 of the social pillar, which is minimum income. So there's numerous hooks there. I mean, for this panel, probably the two which are most pertinent to us are Dombrovskis and Gentiloni. In principle, we see, there's a bit of a step change with even the title of Commissioner Dombrovskis. Sorry? Yeah, but if we're talking about an economy that serves social justice, we now have a commissioner, a first vice president, with a title of creating an economy which works for the people. What that actually means in practice is anyone's guess. Obviously, it seems really the title seems very positive, but he also has. In his mission letter, the mandate to deliver stability, jobs and growth. So you mentioned policy coherence for sustainable development. This is precisely this issue here, right? Here you have a potential contradiction in sort of, the same sentence. So you're trying to create an economy which works for the people, but you're also trying to deliver an economy which delivers for stability, jobs and growth. Not even sustainable, inclusive growth, just growth. And as we've been speaking about before, and if we link to the SDGs, to everything in the climate movement, like everything around planetary boundaries, we know that growth, you can't just continue a growth trajectory on and on, because we only have one planet, we only have these specific boundaries, we see what we're doing to our planet, we see what we're doing to our people. So I think there's a big issue to kind of work through what this economic mandate of the new commission actually is. Is it to create an economy which works for the people, or is it to keep going with business as usual and to deliver stability, jobs and growth? So I think a lot of that is going to come into what happens with the Stability and Growth Pact. They've got a mandate to deliver that, but in what way? Is there going to be any chance of actually making that into something more like a well-being pact, which many of us are calling for? If it's just the standard Stability and Growth Pact being implemented, then it seems like it's going to be more business as usual. In terms of tax issues, I mean, I think Gentiloni has got that in his mandate as well, under the control, if you like, or the guidance of Dombrovskis as well. So these new commissioners have been asked very specifically to look at tax evasion and tax avoidance and to put policies and proposals on the table. And the new president-elect has committed that if there isn't, I think, a digital tax agreed globally by 2020, that the EU will act unilaterally. So a lot of there are these positive words. It's now, I mean, it's as ever, it's the question, what happens? Like, are those words going to actually get translated into meaningful action, which creates value for the lives of normal people as well, or does it remain nice words which mask continuation with business as usual? So some optimism, but some...
We have one question over there, but you wanted to make a quick intervention first. No? Okay, we'll take the question. Okay, now you've woken up. Let's see. Was a woman there, then you, then you, then you. Okay, right. Let's start.
Well, I'd like to refer to what our colleague from the Anti-Poverty Network have said with regards to not just speaking of minimum wages, but also speaking of a maximum wage. Well, I would agree with that for sure, because we have seen what happens to no maximum wages, what has happened to us. But I would like to ask, what do you think about speaking of a living wage? Because the issue of a living wage has become very, very real. We have this new class of working poor amongst us. How are we going to address that? Not even a minimum wage, and some minimum wages keep people in poverty. Most of the minimum wages. And I completely agree that speaking of at risk and not trying to define poverty and calling poverty in its face, it's really putting things under or hiding things under the carpet. On the other hand, with regards to social justice, and again, it's a question, social justice is at the heart of our human rights. And what we are discussing, I believe that we're basically discussing what our foremothers and forefathers have visualized 70 years ago. And we have failed. And then time and again, we bring up Millennium Development Goals, now the SDGs. I think there's no room for complacency and no room to wait. We need to act. And this I tie with what Professor Giovannini said. We should learn from our students. And I would say, let's put child participation part of the whole structure of how we develop our policies. When we hear children and listen to children as their right to be listened to, we're on the eve of the 30th anniversary of the UNCRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Article 12 is very specific, that the children have the right to be listened to. And I think even this, 30 years ago, this is the most widely ratified convention across the globe. I think it's about time to act and really put child participation at the heart of policy development. Thank you.
That was you there?
I don't know if it's one interesting question, but it's a question. About the black job, economy, this underlying economy. What about this black job, le travail noir? How much people working in this situation? How many of these poor people stay in this situation? What is necessary to reinvent certain kind of a job? This is a question. What about this?
Which person would you like to ask? Anyone who feels, okay. I have seen many hands now, so I'm going to take 3 questions and then a second round. So those of you who don't get the microphone now, don't despair. You have already asked so many questions, so I'm going to give it to this one. Thank you.
Thank you. A remark and 2 questions. First, a remark. I really like the opening you created, Leo, on working on tax. We really, as social platforms, should work on it, and in a very technical way. We should go into the details and the technical work. Otherwise, we will have no impact, I think, on the decision-making processes, because it is very, very technical. As I said yesterday, we should, as social organizations, as social platform, way more than in the past, follow the money. We absolutely have to do that. And then two questions. In fact, we saw in the last few years a strong emphasis, focus on unemployment. And we discussed already about the different meanings of work and jobs and this and that. In a technical term, I think we should open up more to working on those that are declared inactive. And I would like to have the opinion of Le Kortebeek on that, because there is quite a difference between labeling somebody as unemployed or being inactive. We see, for instance, in the disability sector that thousands and thousands of people are declared unable to work, inactive, so they disappear from the statistics. You do not even know that they have no job, that they are not included in the labor market, and so and so. And then the second question, what was said during the previous panel is very important. And everybody in this room, I think, agrees that we need a fund for climate actions. But 1/3 of the money will come from social. So we organize a sort of a tension between two very important policy objectives that both need a very important investment. And I think that we should be aware of that as well and try to deal with the possible negative effects of that. We should not go into this trap, I think, to see social and climate as competing with one another. Thank you.
Okay, so we had questions to almost everyone in the panel there, starting with Mr. Williams. Then maybe you, Madame Médon, you can take the question on exactly environment and social justice is in your field. Would you start?
Thanks. I think in terms of living wages and adequate wages, I just had a quick look. Like EAPN has just signed off under the leadership of Sean, who's just in front of you, our position on the post-2020 the post-2020 agenda for the European Union. And there's some details around what we understand by living wage and adequate wage there. The issue that we've been having a little bit with in terms of trying to kind of push and promote living wages, even throughout our network, is that the translations of that terminology doesn't work very well between different countries. So we had a campaign in 2014, I think it was, led by our EAPN in the UK, where the concept of living wage is quite well anchored, and everyone in throughout the UK understands what you mean when you're talking about living wage as opposed to a minimum wage. But even recently, when we've been talking about it within our network, colleagues from Spain and Portugal and other countries don't really feel that it's a useful terminology. So we also talk about things like adequate wages and try to have kind of more detailed definitions of it, essentially. But I think the theory to which you refer and to having a wage which allows people to live a dignified life, absolutely, that's a key point of the EAPN position. And in terms of child rights, maybe two things to say quickly there. As a father with a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old who are being taken to the climate strikes next Friday, I couldn't agree more. We are taking Eurochild's key messages into the ministerial panel later on. Jana has given me 5 or 6 key messages, including precisely what you just said. So I'm trying to take those directly because Eurochild is a member of the EAPN.
There was a question on travail noir. Well, you can, of course.
Also say something about that. I think minimum wage and living wage is connected. Because if you don't have a minimum wage high enough, you can't have a living wage high enough. We discuss a lot with the President Macron about that. We ask him to increase the living wage. And what is the answer is, it's too close now to the minimum wage. I can't increase living wage. Otherwise, people don't want to work. He always thinks that people don't want to work and not that there is not enough jobs. That's a discussion, very big. So I think both are connected and we need a minimum wage higher enough so we can have a living wage, which is not too bad.
Quickly, Mr.
Yes, maybe on wages. I think that one of the problems also on world level and European level is that it seems that the minimum wage is becoming the objective. No, it's a minimum wage. It's not a maximum. It is a minimum, and we have to really. We are also unions. We are always and the ILO. We are speaking about minimum wage as the objective. No, it's living wage. Who is what is the objective? And then the question is how to reach that. And I know that also in Europe we have some discussions about this. For me, it's very clear. It's not opposite to have a minimum minimum wage. It's not opposite on collective bargaining with collective. It's not. You can have this in a discussion with government and social partners. You can have a general minimum wage, and the different sectors, they can build up in their wages and their minimum wages. So I do not think that it is an opposite one on the other.
We had a question from the Italian gentleman about the black sector, the illegal sector, working sector. Yes, Mr. Giovanni.
Yeah. I would encourage the platform to push the Commission to publish the data that every year all countries send to Eurostat about the so-called non-observed economy, which covers both black employment, as you said, but also other types of, let's say, gray or black salaries and so on, because there are some countries that so far have opposed to the publication of this data. We published them in Italy since 1918 something, and there are countries that object, opposed to that. So I think that this would be a big jump in terms of transparency. Recently, the Commission has published the first study about VAT evasion, which is an important step forward. But this could be a way really to increase the transparency. 2 quick points and reactions from what I've said. In the Commission on the Future Work, we have proposed not to do more in terms of lifelong learning, but to establish an individual level to be, let's say, trained during life. You see the difference? This is not about doing more. This is a subjective right to be trained throughout your life, which is going to be the only safeguard, maybe, to automation. And so this is something that so far has not been picked up at all. But I think that this is important for the social pillar because it takes the whole story one step further. And just to recommend you to look at the report.
Ms. Pakarinen, I saw your hand. Yes.
Yes.
Welcome.
I think the one keyword that we heard a lot earlier from Mr. Kortebek was the word transition. And I think it's a key here because we can, of course, talk about minimum wages, but we also need enterprises, companies which are able and willing to pay the wages. The problem is at the moment that the added value which the companies are willing and able to pay for doesn't come from work as it did previously. It comes from different things. Somebody mentioned already the platform economy, and I think that really makes the playfield much more difficult. And to bring added value to the work, there comes the education, and that's why it's so important. So that because previously the work that was paid at minimum wages, it doesn't exist anymore. It gets automated all the time. So we just need to raise the level of education of so many people as possible. In order to be able to give more and more people the wages that they can really live on. And that's where the education comes to play.
Thank you. We had a question from Luc here, one for Mr. Kortenberg and one for you. Do you remember the question?
About, your question, Luc, was it a question you told that you agreed with me, but did you have a question for me?
How to refocus our activities so that we also include the inactive?
Yes. Yeah, of course. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's. I think this was also an important discussion that we had at the ILO. That's why I mentioned, and also Enrico mentioned it. I think that also a lot of people who are disabled and so on. We need to, and also the ILO is not starting, but is focusing on this work more and more. Because we have different systems in different countries, and now what they are doing, what our people are doing, is they are taking advantage of different good models, and working with this and explaining this to other countries and so on. And the question is always, do we integrate them in the real economy or not? And if they're not really integrated, do we count them? Of course we have to count them. And this is a discussion also. At this moment there will be a conference now in November about this subject to seek, okay, how can we manage this in a better way? Maybe something about the black market economy, because I have the microphone, I'm profiting of it. I'm sorry, but in Belgium, for example, we needed the Convention on Domestic Work to have a recognition of the domestic workers, because they didn't exist. They were there, but they didn't exist in reality. Now, because you have also the Social Security who helps in this, they are paid, they have conventions and so on, and they are recognized as workers. So there are methods to formalize the informal economy. It's not easy, but step to step we can do it. Step by step we can do it. There are different models, I think, already in some of our countries.
We have, would you like to direct comment to what Mr. Kortenberg just said? Well, then you first, and then it's definitely your turn.
Sorry, I've been kind of debating about whether I'm going to jump in on this point, because it seems to me that there's a low-hanging fruit with this black market informal economy, but it's a political choice as well. I worry that if you go after taxing the informal economy, you're potentially going to be going after the lower levels of our society, people who are not incorporated in society, by taxing them and using all of your political energy on that, rather than going after the multinationals and the richest. It just seems fundamentally the wrong political choice to me.
Madame Edon, you had the question on climate change versus
fighting against global warming and fighting against poverty. It's really necessary to work together. First of all, everybody agreed that poor people are the first ones affected by climate change. That's okay. But what we don't realize that they are also affected by the measures taken to fight climate change. And that's also the problem. For some example, increases in taxes on fuel and energy. The higher prices hit them harder than the other. You can imagine poorly insulated housing, all cars forbidden in cities. And when public transport are better developed in the suburb, they are renovated the building and increase the rent of apartment. And so the poor people are de facto ejected outside and far away from the city. So we really need to work together. And what we have done, we have created in France the Pacte du pouvoir de vivre, which I will translate Commitment for Empowerment Live, 50 organizations, unions, NGOs fighting against poverty, and NGOs working on environment and fighting global warming. And we did 66 propositions, and we show that we can work together, that NGOs and young people working on environment want also social justice, and that we can make propositions that all of them agree. And Laurent Berger is really ahead of this platform, and we really think that's a different way of thinking. And one thing that we ask is to evaluate the impact of every new law and public policy on the poorest 10% of the population, and also with regard on the SDGs. If we do both on each new law and new policies, looking at the 10% of the poorest people and the SDGs, we will go in the right direction. And I want also to add and do that with the poorest people. And it's not so easy for the NGOs working on environment to learn to work with poor people. I'm sorry to repeat that. We can't make policies without the people themselves. And civil society is also the poorest people. And they have things to say, and they really have things, they are the solution and not the problem.
I'm going to allow, Sorry. I'm going to allow for two final questions, and I already have picked two hands in the air, which is first the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. A general remark. It will be a minefield to deal with maximum wages. So I think that will be a very difficult landscape to navigate. What can be considered nonetheless is maybe take a more central role in this discussion is corporate social responsibility. CSR might be a way of using the carrot rather than the stick, and corporations might still come to the fold on this one, but we can, as civil society, we can make them realize that it pays for them too. And this is definitely one way on how we can all create an economy that serves social justice, because we can highlight the benefits and the opportunities lost if we don't resort to CSR in our approach. So a general remark on that. Thank you.
Who would you like to take your question? In general, okay. Anyways, we also have a lady here. Yes, there you go.
Yes, thank you. I am happy the question of education raised now in the debate, because as we hear, we are in a transition period. And I think that we have to look at this aspect of training along the life, but you change a little bit the terms, and I think it's good. But for me, it's very important because during this period of transition, it gives people to be more able to assume the transition period. And this aspect of continue to be trained along the life is not only, as you say, to do more, but to do for their own capacity and development. And that's also something who could give people more possibility to assume the future. Thank you.
Right. We have first the question on corporate social responsibility and the maximum wage. And it was a question asked to everyone. So who feels, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of a yes, but. I mean, CSR is great, but it's also kind of greenwashing for companies. So it's good because we can get some resources from them, we get their help. Like, I mean, EAPN uses it. We have partnerships with law firms and blah, 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 and I'm sure many others do. But we talk a lot about kind of creating systemic change and changing the systems, and that's not doing that at all. And if we make the link back to climate change, for example, you can have Shell, BP, etc., giving as much corporate and social responsibility funds to all of us, to all of the environmental sector as you like. But unless they're regulated and reined in by governments and institutions, they're going to keep, excuse my French, but they're going to keep screwing the planet and the environment. And so we, as the social sector, our people won't have a planet to live on. So clearly the two sides, not two sides, we're all in the same fight together. But we have to rein in the corporations to play their part properly and to actually make the changes. Like clearly we have to be protecting the people experiencing poverty through the transition, but we have to be tackling the corporations as well. It can't be one or the other.
Mr. Giovannini, did you want to say something quickly?
Yes, 2 points. First of all, I think it would be important to understand how the Commission will put together this fund for the just transition, which is something that should cover those workers who will lose their jobs because of the changes due to fighting against climate change. But as you said before, and as we focused on the Global Commission on the Future of Work, because of the technological changes and many other elements, the number of shocks that people will be subject to in the future will be much higher than in the past. This is why I think we should try to put together the different pieces in what we try to call the resilience guarantee. In other words, the idea that when you have a shock, there is a series of things that help you in moving and not just going back, but jump ahead, if you wish. So at this point, the training dimension, lifelong learning that can help you in preventing or at least reducing the shock, and so on and so forth. You can look at a study that we have published with the Joint Research Center, where we have tried to reclassify economic, social, environmental policies according to policies that prevent, prepare, protect, promote, transform. And I think that if we try to use this approach, which of course are people and environment centered at the same time, you can find a lot of synergies among policies that so far are not being used. We will propose again to the Commission to use this exactly to address the complexity of tasks that each and every commissioner has to perform as a general way of looking at integration of policies.
And we're going to have a final word from Ms. Pakarinen, also representing our host city, so well.
Oh, thank you. So about this transition, I think that what is important is recognize the capabilities that people have. Nobody is a total zero. Even if jobs disappear, professions disappear, they don't disappear totally. And everyone has some kind of capabilities. And what we are at the moment concentrating, for instance, in the city of Helsinki is the immigrants. Because it's very important to recognize the abilities, the capabilities, and the knowledge they already have, and transform it to something that could be useful by education. So nobody has to start from the scratch. There's no need for people to have new degrees, just to a small module to be integrated to their capabilities they have already. And I think that's important. Lifelong learning, it may sound like a really impossible thing to do, but you really need to recognize the capabilities, what there already exists. And that is really, that very often is kind of forgotten. But it's important. And then it's not such a vast task.
And that concludes this panel. A round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much for coming. And now we have Piotr from Social Platform, who has a little surprise.
Well, dear panel, just a little token of appreciation and thanks for the really lively and informative discussion. Deputy Mayor Pakarinen, I know you're Finnish, but I hope you will also appreciate this little gift. Claire, thank you very much.
This is a very good gift.
We are very cute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Some of you are probably heading to the high-level conference, which will take place this afternoon, maybe bringing a message from this conference to the next forum, hopefully bring a good, reduced message of everything that's been discussed here for 3 days. Before you go, again, don't forget to leave your badges in the little carton box over there. And there's also... There's also a closing session. You're gonna have... Sorry, you have lunch now. Sorry. Yes, first food and then nothing else. Oh God, sorry. Well, there's still I know. It's still a good reminder about the badges. I'm getting confused about the badges already. Sorry. All right. Did you need to move? In fact, we need to move. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we can leave the panelists. Sorry, I don't have the. Go. Take your seats.
We're going to do it from the podium, actually.
It's because we're running a bit late, that's why. I think we have that's covered. Yeah, but you can pass 15 minutes or so.
No, I think it'll be easier this time. Okay, since we're running a little bit behind schedule. Oh, there's Shannon here. We will go to the closing plenary and the conclusions, because together with our colleagues in the Social Platform Secretariat and Management Committee, we have been taking note of all the discussions which have been taking place throughout our conference. Close enough? Yes. And our mandate here has been to prepare a set of flagship conference key recommendations, which are not just the messages of Social Platform, but actually we aim to include the messages from all the participants who have been taking part in this event. And actually, at this stage, I would also like to stress how grateful we are to all of those who organized and participated in such engaging workshops and study visits. They were very enriching, informative, and they helped us to link issues which are the top priorities for all of us from the European to the local level. Because when we are looking across the initiatives that we got to visit here in Helsinki, we realized that we are all facing common challenges in Europe. And the economy of well-being, which has this holistic approach, makes the EU work for every person and leaves no one behind, has been really the underlying theme of our discussions, and all of the workshops, the study visits, the panel debates, they all have in one way or another been linked to this concept of economy of well-being. Shannon has greatly prepared or researched a very good definition of the concept of economy of well-being, which is one which takes into account aspects related to social well-being, gender, health, employment, and education, and it emphasizes their importance for economic growth and stability, as well as improving trust in public policy and ensuring the legitimacy of policy making. Long sentence, but a very important one. And our recommendations are broken into three sections, and as far as possible, what we have tried to do is present a bit of narrative for each one of the sets of the recommendations. And the first section of the recommendation stems from the workshops which we held yesterday, and Shannon will be presenting them.
Thank you. So to consider, of course, that economy of well-being encompasses a long-term approach that first looks at the impact of decisions on policies on people's lives. So as was discussed earlier, we need a sustainable Europe, a sustainable future. And one of the first thematic workshops that took place yesterday was the economy of well-being, which starts at work. In the current climate of increasing in-work poverty, precarious job contracts, and exploitative practices, especially impacting vulnerable groups, ensuring inclusive labor markets is essential. This is even more important considering future trends of work and possible developments interconnected with new technologies, and how this may also influence quality and sustainable jobs. So as the title of that workshop says, the economy of well-being starts at work. In that regard, we have some recommendations that came out of the workshop, that decent and well-remunerated work is a precondition of well-being. It's vital to recognize the added value of social economy enterprises as well, and also of cooperatives, as this model is responding to many of the challenges that we've described previously, particularly as they put people before profits. The economy is necessary that works for the people. It needs to have collective representation of all parts of society with civil and social dialogue. And we expect this to be spelled out in the action plan for the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The second workshop was on health equity and social justice. Participants identified numerous challenges related to ensuring health equity across Europe, with social inequities driving health inequities and vice versa. Many harmful effects of poverty and social exclusion manifest themselves as health problems, which further exacerbate poverty and social exclusion, creating a vicious cycle. For instance, people exposed to socioeconomic hardship experience higher rates of poor health, such as mental ill health, and less access to prevention and treatment. The costs associated with this predicament are high, hindering people's individual well-being, and this is not good for people nor the economy. Our recommendations from the second workshop: it would help to reframe the discussion on what the economy is there for. GDP is the only indicator currently being used to assess well-being, but GDP shows no relation to health equity. That needs to be changed, that GDP cannot be the only indicator to measure well-being. We propose a health equity impact assessment to be introduced in the European semester process. This could be used to assess the impact of country-specific recommendations on health inequalities. This impact assessment could be based on the WHO 2019 status report on health inequalities and the health equity tool developed with the 5 following conditions. The first being investment in health services. Second, income security and social protection. Third, investment in living conditions. Fourth, investment in social and human capital. And the fifth, employment and working conditions. The third workshop was on homelessness in Europe. Decent housing is a key component of well-being and a predeterminant of health and a critical lever in fighting homelessness. Despite this, homelessness and lack of affordable housing is on the rise across Europe, and governments tend to respond in a firefighting approach rather than actually addressing the problem and building sustainable solutions. The recommendations from this workshop is that the European Pillar of Social Rights includes Principle 19 on housing and assistance for homelessness. Agenda 2030 and the SDGs commit the EU and member states to eliminate extreme poverty and to ensuring the right to decent, affordable housing for all. For this reason, we need to rely on the existing frameworks of the European Pillar and the SDGs and ensure that these targets are being met. Participants confirmed also that the best way to fight homelessness is to provide access to decent and affordable housing. Housing First is an example in Finland, which is a policy that establishes the right to housing, as we've already heard today. It's a social service intervention for homeless people with complex needs. Housing First combines a person-centered approach that offers support according to individual needs. This sustainable initiative needs to be upscaled across Europe, and the right to decent, affordable housing needs to be prioritized at the EU and member state levels. The fourth workshop was on long-term care. People struggle to access quality long-term care services. Informal carers are providing 80% of care most of the time without support, and care workers are facing very difficult working conditions. Care work traditionally has an inferior value in society and is mostly carried out by women. Universal access to quality long-term care is essential to ensure the well-being of people across the life course. The EU and the member states need to address increasing care needs urgently because of demographic changes. The recommendations is that there needs to be greater recognition of and a positive appreciation of care work, and we need to ensure that carers have a decent standard of living and income and support needed to do their work. We also need an EU strategy on long-term care with a holistic and life cycle approach. The fifth workshop was on how best to fund community-based social services. Social services are a responsibility of public authorities who should ensure that they are affordable, non-discriminatory, accessible, and available, and of good quality. With shrinking budgets, increasing demand, and evolving social needs, public authorities in Europe are being asked to provide more and better social services, but with less money. Clearly, the money spent influences the quality of services offered. To achieve an economy of well-being, therefore, the funding model needs to be adapted to yield high results and economy of well-being. The recommendations from this workshop was that public procurement is not the appropriate tool to fund community-based services. Instead, we need flexible, partnership-based services aimed at cohesion in society. Alternatives such as reserved markets and personal budgets should be considered as they can help service providers to better cater to users' needs. The European Commission should also encourage member states to use reserved markets and personal budgets. We need to move forward from quality of care to quality of life for people with support needs. The sixth workshop was on funding a long-term comprehensive approach to migrant inclusion at local level. First, it was identified that the perception of migrants in our society needs to shift from a negative to a more balanced perspective. Migrants have long been contributing to European societies, evident by their contributions to our social welfare systems, innovative employment options, cultural, social, and political contributions, among others. In order to foster structures that enable migrants to participate fully in society, governments need to address discriminatory practices and create welcoming societies. The recommendation specifically from that is that why the achievement of structures and welcoming societies requires an initial investment, EU, national, and local authorities need to ensure a long-term integration policy that is in place in each of the demographics in each of the countries. Such policies need to focus on people's potential, that allow for their personal ambitions or their life projects, and that allow for self-determination, going beyond the label of being a migrant. To achieve this, governments need to ensure integration from day one, involving a person-centered approach. The involvement of migrants need to also be in decision-making processes. So any policy or measure that affects them requires actually their involvement in the process of developing that policy. We've been proposing these recommendations, many of which are not new. They've been there for quite some time. And it reminds also of the need to emphasize yet again the need desperately to move forward on the horizontal directive and ensure that discrimination is banned outside of the workplace in all areas so that people can access services and attain their self-determination and ensure that the example we heard earlier about Roma people being ostracized from and prevented from entering into bars cannot happen again. But it's also important, what we've heard is the need for a global approach. That a lot of the times when we look at the social policy realm, we're thinking about what's really happening just in Europe. And we need to be conscious of the fact that migration and also the universal approach, the Agenda 2030, is a global approach, and we need to be conscious of the causal effects that these different areas are having on life in Europe as well.
Thank you, Shannon. In section 2 and section 3, we looked at the more overarching themes of our recommendations, and the second one looks at the economy of well-being being that which is based on participatory governance structures. And even though European treaties recognize the role of civil society organizations in civil dialogue, the reality is really far from what is written on the paper. Even though civil society organizations are the most connected to people and can make their voices heard, they lack the seat at the table. In her mission letters to the Commissioner-designates, Ursula von der Leyen talks about bringing Europe closer to home. wanting to strengthen the links between people and the institutions that serve them, to narrow the gap between expectation and reality, and to communicate about what Europe is doing. Immediately, however, she asks that her colleagues regularly take part in Commission-organized citizen dialogues, notably as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe. For us, this is not enough. While social dialogue with social partners is already well established and repeatedly mentioned in political guidelines of the European Commission, or indeed the current mission letter to the Executive Vice President designate for an economy that works for people, Valdis Dombrovskis, we are lacking mechanisms which reinforce an ongoing and systematic civil dialogue between civil society organizations and EU institutions. Because the participation of service users and civil society organizations is key, and it is crucial that policy and decision makers actively engage with them. It requires EU institutions to create obligatory guidelines, including minimum standards for civil dialogue, to make organized civil society equal to social partners in the design, implementation, and monitoring of decisions and policies that impact on people's lives, as well as processes such as the action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights, the European Semester, and Agenda 2030. So our recommendation is that we insist that the Executive Vice President for an economy that works for people goes beyond engaging only in social dialogue and establishes a structured relationship with civil society organizations to ensure that all decisions and policies fully consider their impact on people's lives. The new European Commission also insists that Europeans must have their say on how their union is run and what it delivers. And for this reason, Ursula von der Leyen calls for a conference on the future of Europe starting from next year. Such conference is to bring together citizens of all ages from across the whole of the Union, as well as civil society organizations and European institutions. The responsibility for leading the Commission's work to make the Conference on the Future of Europe a tangible success falls to the Vice President Designate for Democracy and Demography, Dubravka Šuica. Well, this is welcome. However, the devil is in the detail. Amongst the first steps which the Commissioner Designate is asked to undertake, it is to ensure the widest possible participation in the Commission's citizens' dialogues, to ensure that Europeans can shape the outcomes of the conference. Involving civil society organizations, their voice and the voice of the people they represent disappears. Our recommendation is therefore, we insist that the Vice President for Democracy and Demography actively involve civil society organizations right from the beginning of her mandate in the development, contributions, and follow-up to the Conference on the Future of Europe. And last but not least, our Section 3 looks at economy of well-being that ensures socio-economic and environmental justice for all. So throughout our conference, we have reaffirmed that social justice in Europe should reflect the common values about which we talked so much, the values of solidarity, tolerance, respect, non-discrimination, just to mention some of them. However, both for our conference participants and for Social Platform, it is very clear that our current economic system does not serve social justice. Europe, which is one of the richest places in the world, has an economic system which permits over 100 million of its people to live at risk of poverty and social exclusion. This smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth of the economic model which we have does not deliver for people and the planet, and it does not serve social justice. So we do not want trickle-down economics, as we have said many times throughout this conference. This trickle-down economics has led to inequalities, lower non-existent minimum wages, welfare and social protection systems that push people further and further into poverty, where common good for all simply does not exist. Over the last decade, economic policies have paid too little attention to their impact on people, whereas austerity measures have cut back investment in social welfare and services, health and education. Social justice, therefore, cannot be achieved through social policies alone, and I'm re-quoting what Leo was saying, was actually quoting during his session as well. It requires a paradigm shift, a radical change of the current mainstream vision and the functioning of Europe's economic model. Integration of economic and social policies is essential to achieve an economic model that is socially inclusive and sustainable. And to this end, we have two recommendations. We insist that social cohesion, tax justice, and environmental sustainability are recognized by EU institutions and member states as core objectives of economic, monetary, and tax policy reforms. and not just as an add-on, so that the well-being of people and the planet are put at the center of decision-making. We also insist that to take stock of social developments at EU level and to monitor the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights and the Agenda 2030, Member States, led by the current and upcoming presidencies, and in partnership with EU institutions, organize an annual social summit in which civil society organizations are engaged throughout the process. And that concludes our proposed recommendations from the conference. So I hope that we have managed to capture what you have been discussing. So I think, if that's okay, we'll move on to the closure of the conference. Well, I think because we're completely on time. So just a few words of thanks once again. Thank you to the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health of Finland, the Finnish EU presidency of the European Council. We've had great support from SOSTE, from our colleagues in the network, and with civil society organizations, think tanks, and other local organizations who have hosted us during the study visits. We've had support from the city of Helsinki and had a wonderful reception on Monday evening, which I enjoyed. I hope you all have enjoyed as well. We would like to thank, of course, our excellent speakers, presenters, moderators. What has made possible for us to be here is the funding that we receive from the Europe for Citizens program, which is administered by the executive agency, Education, Audiovisual and Culture Executive Agency. It's a mouthful. I'd like to thank our photographer, our cameraman. I would like to thank Folkhälsan staff, and especially Susanne, if I'm correct. She has been absolutely brilliant in making sure that this conference runs absolutely smoothly. And last but not least, thank you to my colleagues in the MC and all of you in the Social Platform Secretariat staff. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch now.
A final word from me is that you are going to receive an evaluation form. You've either received it already or you will receive it in your email. And it would be very appreciated by the organizers if you would fill it in and send it back as soon as possible.